Oh, here we are. We're going live. We are live. We're live. It's alive. Ah, there we go. A little sliver of light. Oh, well, here it is. The last day of April, year zero, 2020. And it's one of those moments of the razor's edge. Oh, who wrote? There was a great book called The Razor's Edge about World War One, the 20s, and the seeming apocalypse just ahead. What was his name? Sinclair Lewis, that's it. He also wrote the book about the meat packing factories that brought on the FDA. And it usually takes a catastrophe to bring some kind of constitutional sense to our best. We have the best legislators money can buy. Money can't, no money has been spared to bring us our legislators, from our chief executive through the courts, and the courts have always been there to look for the best interest of the well vested, right? Well, here we are at 2 minutes and 16 seconds. And there AI is. It took you some time, AI. Where you? In the toilet or something? And good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are. This is your Sensei Bob, your Griot, and I am coming to you over our channel, Dreamy Dreamland with Sensei Bob. I am your sensei, and I am your Griot to tell you a story. And today, again, I reiterate that it is the last day of April, right? The great year of our Puddinhead, the year zero, right? And we have a choice here, gang. We can either, this is very similar to what it was around 200 AD. Everyone thought, it was still the Roman Empire, They hadn't realized that the businessmen of Rome, along with the Khazarian mob, had rebranded the Roman Empire into the Holy Roman Empire, right? And the Vatican City was just getting rolling, right? And we were just getting into the Crusades, going after other people's money, right? Which was a business plan of the Khazarian mob. They had it down. And so they needed a invisible enemy because the Islamic nations were too far away. Most of Central and Eastern Europe couldn't care less. They were just living in their own slop. Dealing with the sheriff and the duke and the bishop and all of the above. Gang, you should go read the Wife of Bath's Tale by Chaucer, right? Now, a number of you, if you were trained classically, read those books, those stories, Chaucer's works, just like you read, Homer's Iliad, right? And you didn't, your teacher just, wanted you to get the dates and the names right. It didn't go very deep into anything, but they were all coded stories, very similar. If you read those, you were going to understand the code of the Torah and the New Testament and every other sacred book, the Vedas, Hammurabi, the whole ball of wax, because we're all the same, because we all came from the Anunnaki's science experiment, and that's something, why the powers that shouldn't be don't want to hear anything about it. Hey, Miss L, how you doing? Oh, I'm doing good. It's the last day of April, right? And in your neck of the woods, it's getting to be May Day, right? You're going to get up there with your May Day flag and be a worker, hail the worker state, right? The did you ever, Elena, did you ever see the movie The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo? Good alive, how are you doing? Well, I'm doing good, as I always do well. You will see less and less of me because I am leaving these digs soon, and I will just be in the deep green. And luckily, they're talking about this state easing up, right? So they might open up the restaurants, and then I could again, go visit a restaurant once or twice a week, and talk to you guys. Still got to take the damn responsibility. Yeah, no, it's not. No, you should never look at responsibility as damn responsibility. It's an opportunity. This, whatever this is, same as it ever was. I mean, this is nothing different than, the Carpathian Wars. This is nothing different than the Peloponnesian Wars. This is nothing different than the 100 Years' War, or the sinking of the Spanish Navy, or the, you name it, the Boer War, the whatever war you want to put your finger on. It's the same time. This goes to show you that we do not live in a linear time. You can take this all the way back to, like I said, the Spanish-American War, when America blew up its own aging battleship, the Maine, and killed about 1,000 guys. And then said this, the American Navy was a steam-powered metal Navy. The Spanish was still a sail Navy, wooden ships, They were like 18th century Navy. They had a lot of boats. They were there first, and nobody wanted the stuff that they had until we did, right? And people don't realize that the United States, they not only got, Central Central and South America, but they also got the Pacific, all the Hawaii, all into the Marianas, the Philippines. The Philippines almost became a state, right? And that's kind of why the Japanese attacked it, because we were right on the friggin' doorstep. Just like the Chinese, the Chinese don't have a military, And, it's very interesting, gang. The Chinese are pretty smart. So they had this COVID thing, and whether they took it out on purpose or in if you go look at, you can go on the YouTube and look, if you go on my channel and look at, the things of interest I look at, there's this guy, I forget his name, Crowd Search Truth or something like that. And again, a lot like many, YouTube channels, including your Sensei Al-Bab, don't believe a word I say. This show is not for children or people with closed minds. This is a show for folk who have an open mind. Let's see. And it's hard for me to read in small case. I only got one pair of glasses on. I'll have to go find my other glasses, which might take me 20 minutes. So put it up in capital so I can actually read this stuff. Side 2 always goes to be slower, take responsibility. Yeah. See, and also always take responsibility or not. I mean, we don't know squat about. This whole novel, Nouveau 19. Why they called it novel? Because coronaviruses are a type. A phyla, a family. Colds and flus, and there's rhino and there's corona, right? So this why they call it Nouveau, and they stopped calling it relatively quickly, is because it represents as an RNA strain alone, period. That's it, right? So it's just scrubbing bubbles, right? Those kind of viruses should not be passed, by me breathing on you, right? If you're wearing a mask, So if, the RNA, the interesting thing about Anthony is he actually has a patent on the Nouveau 19. So whatever injection we get brought to us by skinny mini micro penis Billy Boy, it won't do anything really except make those guys a lot of money, right? And so this whole adventure has had me do my homework on what's a virus, what's a germ, what's a bacterium, what's what did Pasteur do? Pasteur was people who are famous are the people who stole stuff, right? And you read my novels, a number of them, I quote James Joyce, I'm proud to be a cut and paste man. And you know what he did? He wrote his stuff in little notebooks like this. He's a big fan of composition books. And he would write it all out in longhand. Then he would cut it up and paste it in books like this. So he didn't he was doing what word processing does with a pair of scissors and glue, cut and paste. And that's where they got that term. Anyway, so I'm that guy. I'm Mr. Cut and Paste, right? And so I basically, if you're not reading books, you can't be a writer. I just unearthed a whole bunch of books of French philosophers, and that whole crowd of Wardencrafts, Mary Shelley's mom and her husband, who did the Paris Commune, right? And I read this book. I reread Frankenstein, which is a great book because in that whole book they do not call it the monster; they call it the creature. And he was a poet and a very smart guy. And all of the havoc that's caused is by relationships. And that book is truly a metaphor of Shelley's representation of her father. She loved her father. Her father, when she was a young girl, gave her, a classic education. He had an amazing library as a philosopher. And all the way up until her puberty, she was his pride and joy, and kept telling her, you're going to be a famous writer, da, 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 da. Then, boom, the hormones pop, and she meets a few guys, and they were all guys who idolized her father. I mean, that's how they came into, and so he was kind of jealous because these guys were younger, handsomer, hornier than he was, and they weren't her father. Anyway, so he kind of distances himself from Mary. And plus, when Mary was born, it killed her mother, who was a brilliant woman. She was a lot smarter than her husband, you go read her works about the Paris Commune and that whole genre of French philosophy, Zola and all those guys, right? And so anyway, that's what I've been reading the last few weeks. And so that's what's been influencing my thinking and my writing. And that's, going to be a writer. That's kind of what you got to do. And so you see really good writers like Chris Hitchens. That guy, he's rereading Tolkien's, and Lenin's thing of the revolution, which is like 89,000 pages long. He's like me. I'm the poster boy of self, spacing. It's me and the next guy's a half mile away. And I'm going to be even deeper into that. I'm going to be, a couple miles away from the nearest anybody, right? And that's why I won't be able to, drop a YouTube, Oh, thank you, dear. Let's see. Corona is clear. Corona crowd 19. You know why the 6 feet is being, because that is what artificial intelligence, when people are closer, like shoulder to shoulder, facial recognition doesn't work. 6 feet is what they need, right? And so that they're like drumming it into the Chinese. So everyone's 6 feet. So the facial, and that's, this all kind of started back in 2017 when China said, okay, now we make everyone's junk. We have the second largest economy. We have the largest GDP. We're going into the future. We are conquering AI. Now, they didn't say they were conquering digital electronics because they don't have it in them to do it. But what they do have is that they have the vastest population that is under surveillance, right? And so if you go to Jimmy Dore's show, a couple of days ago, he had this woman who's a researcher. She did a FOIA report and uncovered a thing that was put in place around 2017, 18, when China said, we're going to own AI. And by, it'll be the year 2025 and we are going to own it, right? Well, it's not like inventing a new little chip. No, it's like AI is a software. It's a program. It's an algorithm that teaches itself. And the only way it can learn is watching other watching human beings. And so China has the largest, vastest crowd under AI surveillance than anywhere. And so Jimmy had this woman who got this report that, the hidden hand, high table / the powers that shouldn't be, who control Carrot Head, basically stated, okay, listen, we're real, NSA, Defense Department, and Silicon Valley, which are almost indecipherable. They're almost the same thing. Basically, what good old Mr. Eisenhower said, the military-industrial complex. And I have to put my hats off to Laura Eisenhower. She is, for a woman who has been, go look at her webpage, her YouTube, see her story. Whether you believe it or not, it's like just looking at the poor girl. She is like a patron saint. She's really trying hard to stay on, be her heart. She leads with her heart. She's a good example of thinking with your heart and not your head. Let's see. It's good, Bob. The forest is good. Yep. And I can't be any deeper in it. At least in, the North, and I don't even know it. I'm in the belt of Appalachian poverty. So there's nobody here, as my judge friend says, this is the armpit of America. Said there's nobody here, so there's no one getting sick. So no one travels, no one goes anywhere. Half the people within 100 square miles of me had never gone further than 20 miles from their front door. So they're just sitting around, and they were poor to begin with. So, being that much poor, it's like me. I've been poor now 5 years, and I've, got it down, So China and Australia is not good with, Lana, have you gone and seen Max Igon's Crow House? Here's another patron thing. He's going, if you go back to his radio show 20 years ago and his website, and then he's been on the YouTube, I guess, since 2010 or thereabouts. He was an angry young guy, and he has now kind of realized that the only thing you can do is, love. Uh, but again, it's not the new normal. This is the same as it ever was. We are just being rebranded. There's a difference between things being different and rebranding. We rebranded after the Spanish American War to manifest, actually with Jefferson, we rebranded from a republic to manifest destiny, meaning we're going to take everything on that we can. And that was a manifest destiny, right? And then the Spanish American War. We're going to take we've taken all of North America. Now we're going to take Mexico, Central, South America, and the Pacific, and that's our new, sphere of influence, right? And so we moved our navy, to Hawaii and the Philippines, and once we got airplanes, we turned the Philippines into one gigantic airplane landing area, aircraft carrier. And once we gave up the Philippines with Subic Bay, which is not Subic Bay, but it's a thing kind of neat in the Marianas, little teeny island. That we have now taken, all our B-52s and B-1s and a ton of other aircraft were there. And we've taken them out in the last month or so, right? And that's where that, Guam and that whole neck of the woods is where we had our Pacific Navy. We're taking it all out. And what we are allowing or precipitating is a large military conflict between China and Japan. It's going to be over Korea. Uh-oh. I'll be right back. Oh, I don't know what that was, but I'm not going to go check it out. I'm back. Let's see. What have we been saying? Let's see. Well, you are more adjust with this new normality than use while surviving. Are you going to survive in the future? Yep, pretty much. I mean, more for people that cannot live without a new haircut or makeup. Yep, it's going to be difficult. Have you seen the Pentagon that allowed us just to see what footage the pilot took? Talking about flying saucers? Yeah, well, that's, a scam. I mean, basically, there's a thing called Majestic 12. And, I mean, we have been, you look at the Bible, and there's what's his name's, spinning fire wheel in the sky and angels coming out of the sky and the Nephilim and the Anunnaki, the reptiles, you name it. It's, let's see. I'm going to go see you later around. Please take care. Always do. Thank you, Lena. Love you, baby. And everyone, the other two who are on there. And I love you too. Love you too, puppy dog. Yep. Anyway, somebody tried to come in and the dog nearly ate them. And that's why you have a dog. So they left scampering away. And I got the dog calmed down. And so everything's fine. Anyway, so again, I am going to, this is better, maybe. Where was I? So it's the same as it ever was, gang. It's just being rebranded, And, the last time we had one of these, it was called the Dark Ages, lasted 900 years. Plague lasted 900 years. And if you go look at it, you have to read, not the stuff that most people read, but back in the day, between the 3rd and the 14th century, give or take, the smartest people on earth were women, right? And they used to rule. The last, Sparta was ruled by women. They stayed at home, ruled and sent off their young to kill and maim for them. And they had a city up on the mountain, right, with this big kind of wall thing that was part of the mountain that took care of their whole city. And they had one entrance in and one entrance out. That was a big inclined plane, and they had a number of gates and people could just shoot down at the invading hordes and no one ever could get in. But they could send their armies out. And they would send them out for long periods of time. They weren't just to go out and fight and come back. I mean, they didn't have to transport a line up. They didn't have to manufacture their hardware in that city state and then transport it to the front lines. Those guys went out and basically foraged, stole their enemy's food, took their enemy's weapons, travel light, the story of the 300, that kept off the whole Persian hordes, with 300. And it was all run by women. And if the guys came back losing a fight, when they were sent off, the women would send them off with flowers falling down and kisses and hurry back, but if they came back without winning, the guys didn't, you had to sleep outside, right? So women ruled. And then for some reason, girls gave up. And they said, fine, you think you can do it better? Good, do it. And it's been misogynist ever since. And men are so insecure that they totally misogynist, right? Any guy who has to be that way with women is like, forget about it, right? Thing is, women are great. Women are the other half of what's the other half of me is a woman, and other human beings. I'm not a singular, separate entity. I am a member of all my relations, right? And I've been that way since I was born, right? Because I came out dead and a woman saved my life, right? Dr. Teresa, right? At great, because she was the first woman they let in. She started this discipline of neonatal babies born in stress situations, and all these big high puffy doctors were taking care of my mom because she was the Adolf Hitler of the doctor medical scene. She ran Roosevelt Hospital, and she, her name wasn't on anything, but she ran it. And all of the people above her let her because it was like straight out of Brazil, the movie by Terry Gilliam, right? Where the most competent folk were on like level 5, and all the people up, at top of the heap, they were the most in loser folks, because the hidden hand knew to put those people in charge because they were expendable. The guys who were really running stuff, the lower middle management, they kept them on the down low to protect them, basically, and I've been on the down low my whole life because, I've been protected, basically, right? And I've been allowed to do this because it is needed, just like Laura Eisenhower. And I really, again, have to give it to her. And also, why is Max Igon still on YouTube? I mean, he's saying stuff that because they need him to say that stuff. Same with Richie from Boston and, Jimmy Dore and a whole bunch of other people who are speaking. And the bottom line about the truth community is the joke, because you cannot speak truth without freedom unless you are free to say what you wish. And most people who are in the truth community, just like the guys who are in the mainstream media, they're restricted, They are motivated by their egos, right? Because they love getting the feedback from the audience. Me, I get, Lena, a few people, Alan, and Buddy, and a few others. And, I really, the only thing I get on Gmail is spam these days. It's like a joke. I don't even look at it anymore. And I don't need to look at it. I don't have to. It's like Facebook. I don't have Facebook. I don't have any of those things because I don't need that kind of self-gratification, right? And so I'm just doing this in service to love's co-creation, I realize that we are on this precipice again. The same as it ever was. Nothing's any different. I mean, this is just like 2001. This is just like Y2K. This is just like, the .com bubble, just like, the whole Bill Clinton. I mean, that whole scene, if you see, everything he did set up what we've got going on today. And it was all because, so here's a guy whose mother was basically a prostitute, They said that she was a nurse, but she ran a home. Anyway, so Billy was around all of that growing up, his formative years. Smart boy. He was in a school, high school, and he was like, put on the fast track, Rhodes Scholar, right? He didn't even finish that. He got in trouble and brought back and put right into the mix, right? And he was, the linchpin of Iran-Contra. George H. said that he was his most beloved son, which, left out George W. and the other morons. And, and Billy Boy's ahead because, I was there in New York when they brought him out, in the 80s to test the waters of New York. And New York was a great bee test because it had everybody, every slice of every pie of every political entity in, let's see, Bob, okay, gotta go. Yep. And so how about some thumbs up, kids, and some comments here. So anyway, I was there in the Penta Hotel, and I had a number of friends in the Politico scene. And through the NEA, through my work at the UN, at NGOs, a lot of, people who thought of themselves as kingmakers, powerful folk. But I went along because they took me to interesting parties where I always met interesting women who were very powerful and moneyed. And, until I met my first wife, till I was 27, all the women in my life were somewhere between 4 and 12 years older than me. And they knew exactly what they wanted. And they kind of thought I was cute and thought I was interesting. Didn't try to change or do anything. They just liked to go along for a ride. And I serviced them nicely. And I wasn't like taking money from them, but they were, putting me in really interesting positions, meeting interesting people, going to interesting places. Hey, you want to go out on this yacht boat? Yacht boat. The thing was like, as big as a Queen Mary. There, 120 people on a Caribbean cruise. We got on this. We took an airplane from New York to Florida, and we got on this boat, and we went through the Caribbean. That was the first time I went to the Caribbean. And we stopped at all these islands, and we did not go through anybody's customs. We just kind of landed on these islands that weren't the main island, but they were in other countries. We get off, and there'd be a nice house there with a thing on the beach and a real catered affair. We'd stay a few days there, and then we'd take littler skiffs or ferries to the main island, go shopping or see things and visit stuff. And as guy with a anthropologic taste, it was okay. So I liked older women. I had no problem. And again, I was still in my listening phase. And I wouldn't say anything unless I had something to say. Right? I wasn't looking to be, and I've never looked to be. It wasn't until I got this job as being the Griot that I really spoke at all. So is the active listener, right? And I kind of eked into the Griot stage through performance art. First in the 80s, like my good friend Beth Lapidus and my other, Ralston Farina. He invented the term performance art. Right. And he was so brilliant and so obnoxious that, he is, I don't even know if he's even a smidgen of a thing of the history of the arts. Right. And he died of spinal meningitis in California. And his then almost girlfriend was Paula Sweet. Right. And Paula Sweet's Garments. And she's the one who came to my law and said, "Oh, Ralston's dead." And she was just about to get into a relationship with him when he went off to, Stanford to do something. And, he stayed there for 6 months and then he got sick and died. Whether it was that or AIDS, who knows? Because it was in that in-between period. So anyway, so in her grief, we became a thing. And again, she was older than I, had money, and she was right on the burgeoning of explosion of her empire. And she made a big thing. She was one of the first people to have, instead of having the garment district make her stuff on 8th Avenue, she had people in China make it, right? And she didn't go there and stick around and make sure they did it right. And so when the Chinese people made these, you know, jean jackets and clothes, and they did it inside out, right? And so the seams were on the outside, right? And the decorations were along with the seams, and she got the first 250,000 units that she had already sold to Target or somebody like that, a mass outlet, and she didn't even realize that it was aghast, right? And so because she didn't say anything, the guys put it on, and it sold like overnight. It was a fad, it went viral, and then she became famous for that, for about 5 years. That's all she did. And just because of that mistake, and she didn't even realize it, and it went, and it became, and she, got all this money in the bank, and they wanted another 20 million units, and the Chinese guys were all set up to do it. She just said, "Hey, let's go for 20 million units," and it all sold like that. It was like, so it was like I was her lucky rabbit's foot, right? And she did have a semi-factory, but it was her design studio on 8th Avenue. She bought, a building there on, it was like more near West Village, 8th Avenue than, it's like right where 8th and Varick start, or 7th and Varick, or whatever that is. And there were all these really great semi-factory buildings that were built for World War II, and where they made the widgets that they sent over to the shipyard and made the bigger things. And so she bought either a building or a floor, and she had me design it and light it and build it for her design studio. And then I, took that money and took one of my little sojourns for about 4 months, and I came back, and she had got herself a new guy, right, which was more fitted for her, right? I mean, we still stayed really sweet friends. She's Paula Sweet, and we were sweet friends until she became so rich, she left the country, and God knows where she is now. But really, I've always enjoyed the company of women, and especially older women who are confident with who they are, right? And the women who have been my age or younger in my life were still strong women, and I let them be who they were, and that's why they really liked me, is because I was their muse. I was like their support. I was their, hey, you're great, keep going, don't worry. Other guys have said, no, you are, just keep doing what you want. Like Donna Ann, perfect example. World famous now, and she was not sure of herself because she had all these great blessings and all these great talents that people thought she was nuts, but she wasn't. She was just, amazingly brilliant and strong and vibrant. And she had, she was a crone, didn't even know it. It wasn't until we went to Ireland and spent, almost a month there that she really, and because we kept bumping into these women, I never took her to see the old crone because by that time it didn't, the stars didn't line up. And when I took her to really, like, I tried to find a little alley in Dublin, and it didn't quite work. It rained. She didn't want to do it. We didn't stay in Dublin too long. She didn't like Dublin. I took her to my hangouts, and she was put off by them all because there are all these old guys, poets, bards, really strange men and women, and it scared her, right? Because she had more in common with them than almost anybody else, so it kind of scared her. But this show today, again, welcome to, if you're just getting aboard here at Dreamy Dreamland with Sensei Al Bob. I am your sensei, and again, don't believe a word I'm saying. These are all stories, and this is not a channel for children. This is not a channel for insecure people. This is not a channel for people who believe in what they're told. If you're watching the mainstream media, and believing all of that, now I can't tell you what's going on. I'm out in the middle of the woods. But my perspective from being able to observe it from far away, and the fact I've been through a number of these, cholera, now that's a pandemic, and that sweeps through areas and kills, thousands of people in a day, in like a city, right? So typhoid's another just, culls the herd. And most of those things go away through herd, inoculation, basically. And, to think that, medicine and science really are just another, superstitious religion. They got nothing on truth. They don't really prove anything. What they do is they have an outcome, and then they make research based on that outcome. When I first took my first statistical analysis course, my first demographic course, and my first modeling course, all three of those guys and gals said to me and to the class, "Well, kids, I'm going to teach you how to lie with numbers." And basically, that course, we would start, most people who were in that discipline had to take that course, right? They didn't have to take it with those professors, but they had to take that course. And those professors taught it outside the box, and they were trying to give the students the value of their experience in the real world. And I'd be there the first day, there'd be 20, 30 people in the classroom. By drop ed, there'd be 8 of us, if that, right? And then we were allowed to do research. That was what that teacher was going for. They were looking for that 8 people to do their research for them with an outside the box point of view. And that's why I kept getting these amazing teachers, because I wasn't matriculating, I was studying, right? I was a scholar. And I would read this person's book, or hear about this person being quoted in another book I was reading, and I would go check them out. I mean, that's how I found Joseph Campbell at Georgetown, and and also that's how I found Dr. What was his name? Quigley from the CFR at Georgetown, right? And all of these schools, like Yale, Georgetown, Duke, UMC, Stanford, a few other schools, University of Maryland at College Park, Penn State, and what other schools were? Cornell. Those schools were all bastions of, where entities like the Trilateral Commission, Club of Rome, Council on Foreign Relations would have these, studies going on, and they would, Ford Foundation, Oppenheimer, Carnegie, Mellon, who else? Rockefeller. All of these foundations would be the money behind these, right? And things like, I always forget these guys. It starts with a B. I have to think of a mnemonics. There's a whole little thing I was taught when I was taught the Woods speed reading course. Was called the Mind Palace, where you put facts into rooms in the palace. And you just think of where that room is, and you go to that room, and all the facts are there, and you can see them, So, but for some reason, certain facts I never stuck in rooms, right? Because maybe I wanted to forget about them. And so, But I was always, Madame Kluver taught me how to have, conscious, vivid dreams, right? So you could, you meditate before you go to sleep. So you would, go into your Akashic record. So when you slept, you'd be awake, right? You go in one of those 9 doors, and that's where you were going to have your dream, and they were the mystic 9 doors. And the one door that's always open is the door to your own superconscious mind, your own sanctuary of your own choosing. And that's, as I do less and less of these shows, that's why I tell you, I have over 1,200 of these shows. And you say, how can you do that, Sensei Al Bob? Well, I don't, there's a guy, there are all these people like Truthstream Media and Truly Gracefulness and the James Kober Report and guys, and, Max Igon and folks, and they produce their show. I mean, they do an amazing job. They really research the stuff and they show you it, not me. I tell you a story about it, right? Brookings, see, it just popped into my mind. Stop thinking about Brookings, right? They are, you go look at the Brookings Institute, right? You go look at the Tavistock Institute, those two, right? They have done more to play with your brain than anybody else. So we're down to 4. And 1 thumbs up. How about a few more thumbs up? How about a few more subscribers? But anyway, you would say, so Sensei Bob, how do you do? Because, Kobor, I think he has 600 shows up. Well, he does really well-researched, scripted. And then he memorized, meaning I just do this off the top of my head. This is stream of consciousness stuff. That's why I'm a Griot. I'm telling you a story. It's a stream of consciousness, right? These guys know they do a really bang up job of getting the info out, right? So I got 1,200 shows, and, tomorrow, May 1st, right? A week from tomorrow will be May 8th, and that will be my 200th year, my second year of doing this. It feels like 200 years, actually. Anyway, ow. So, you should start going back and looking at these past shows because they're all, every single one of those over 1,200 shows that I've done, right, are, I go into, a shamanic state. I go into my imaginary mirror. I go into my, subconscious mind, my library of my Akashic record. I go into my sanctuary of my own choosing, where all my guides live in Shambhala. Shambhala is up on that hill, up in the clouds there above the grand house of truth. I have the Oracle of Delphi in my sanctuary, and it looks just like Frank Lloyd Wright's Falling Waterhouse, but way bigger. Meaning the front door is like 40 feet high, and the lettering over the doors in Greek is, know thyself, right? And so you can go there, and you go back and go find all of those. I must have done at least 100 to 200 guided meditations. Well, actually, if you go, close your eyes and breathe in that 20% and breathe out that 40% and breathe in the prana and, connect that current to your chi, Mother Earth, bingo, you'll be able to clean, cleanse, know, heal, anything, right? And don't believe a word I say. Go try it out, right? So and I'll still do a show or two here, but it won't be twice a day that I've been doing for the last 2 months or so because I've had the access to it. And it won't be 3 or 4 times a week I did before this because the restaurants were open, and the one that was just 8 miles from my house, I could go there and get online. So I was doing 3 to 4 to 5 shows a week, right? all that last year. But now, if the restaurants don't open, and the library, I would go to the library, but that was, when a funky, holler restaurant has better Wi-Fi than your county library, you know how much the county believes in education of the 3 counties around here. They have had their schools closed since Thanksgiving. They've actually, basically furloughed all of their teachers. They're not opening till next year, and they don't expect even to open then. So they couldn't care less about educating these kids, right? Because the rich kids go to private schools. All the holler kids, they don't care. They could, they'll be dead by the time they're 30. So that's where it's at. Anyway, I have to stretch a little bit. If I don't stretch, I start to rust. So, same, and also I have to go into my pocket here and take out the thing that keeps me regular. Right? It's quite interesting. Right about this time, about 1 o'clock, if I eat 1 prune, by 8 o'clock, I have a nice elimination, right? Yeah. I do have to kind of break it up a little bit because I don't have teeth to chew it. I love prunes. Good thing I love them. Pretty much I love everything. Right? There really isn't anything. Even stupid people I love. Because I have empathy for them. Because, at least 20 times a day I'm a moron. I don't believe a word I say. I don't know why you should. It's just my observations of the time and space that I have experienced for the last 7 years. So, I've seen, the early 70s with Nixon. And Nixon was taken out because, poor Dick. I mean, anybody named Richard who decides to call themselves Dick has issues. Dick Armey, Dick Cheney, these are all good examples. There's a movie that was made last year, the year before, about Cheney. I think it was called Vice. And it was quite good. Again, it's a movie that you shouldn't believe at all, but it was excellent. Because there's a scene, right? He's been navigating, and he's totally been motivated. His muse has been his sweetie Lynn, right? She's the smart one. She's the one who wants to rule the world. And she's doing it through Dick Cheney. And basically, he was a behind-the-scenes guy, him and Rumsfeld. And they were about power, not about position. Because they ruled through fear, and especially Cheney. People was, once he got into power, he scared the crap out of everybody. So he took over when Nixon was thrown out. He was in the government in what they would call the deep state, him and Rumsfeld, because they kept going in and out of the corporate world into, government, corporate, Halliburton, Rumsfeld, was running elements of big pharma. He got everyone got cancer through aspartame. And there was also another guy who, kind of helped, so you have to realize that Dick Nixon, he's the guy who started the, EPA. He started, really all the elements that were trying to protect the public from the corporate world. And that was one reason why I got rid of him. Huh? That Dick was already emotionally strangled. World War II and the 50s did it to Dick. He was his protege was Prescott Bush. H. Bush and W. Bush's daddy. Who basically tried to have in the 30s, he represented big money through a number of Wall Street legal firms that the brothers, the guy who was the two, Wall Street lawyers. One was the head of the CIA, and the other was Secretary of State under Harry Truman, and Ike, the two brothers, the Dulles brothers. And why we had World War II was those two guys were the lawyers at Versailles that wrote the treaty, along with a number of French lawyers that basically threw Germany under the bus, right? Because Germany didn't lose World War I. The quote-unquote allies and the Germans and their allies just agreed to have a cessation of war, right? It was an armistice, right? It wasn't, World War II was just a continuation of World War I. And the Dulles brothers threw Germany under the bus to the point they were in depression right away in their 20s. When we were having roaring 20s, Germans, go see the movie, Cabaret. There's a scene where this Nazi guy, but he's still a human being, comes out on the street and sees one of his professors who he really liked. He's getting beaten up by the brown shirts, right? And he chases the brown shirts away and picks and he can't believe that it's his professor. Because because his professor was relatively well off, endowed in a university, had a nice house and family, prestigious family. And basically, here's this guy looking like a bum. And the guy cleans him up and, lifts him up and says, Professor, what's going on here? He says, oh, well, I'm Jewish. And he goes, I didn't know you were one of those Jews. He goes, no, if you're Jewish, it's not one of those. It's, he said the same thing, when this first started, I wasn't involved. I was a scholar. I wasn't involved in politics. I wasn't a socialist or a communist or any of those. I wasn't a gypsy. But after Kristallnacht, they went, came into my house and took all our stuff and threw us on the street. And we had to go live in the ghetto. And I'm sharing a one-room flat, with 5 other families, and we have no food to eat. And he goes, what are you doing out at night here in front of this place? He goes, well, my 3 children are working in the club, and I'm waiting for them. And he goes, what are they doing there? And he basically says, they're servicing people. And the guy doesn't understand. And so he goes, listen, Professor, you need to get out of here. So he gives him some money and he says, I'll go in and get your children. And he goes in, and it's totally debauched, right? And he goes into like the, VIP room, and he finds these kids that he knew because he used to go to the household of his professor, and he knew the young girl who is now, she's now 17 instead of 14. And the 2 boys are now 14 instead of 9. And they're all 3 of them performing very, lurid sexual activities for the clientele who they're servicing. And that's the only money they can make to feed their family. And that movie, that scene is all of, a minute of the 90 minutes of the film. But that one scene of this guy who's never been in the cabaret, because you're seeing the cabaret life and all the people and their troubles and their issues and this and that. But this guy is a guy coming who's a good German, who's on the teetering of becoming a Nazi, and he goes in, and here's this professor he saw who was like one of his great mentors, and he goes in and he sees what he knew these children, and he sees what this whole thing has done. And it's basically coming from the two brothers, right? The Americans, right? Who, made the Versailles Charter, right? So that's where we are. Same as it ever was, right? And basically, we have the best in all our governments, not just the United States. But you go look at any government, Australia, New Zealand, Japan, China, Italy, Germany, France, they're all corrupt, right? They're all, Canada, they're all corrupt. They all have legislators the best money can buy. And they're all doing, they're always stumbling across, look at Brazil, the guy they have in charge there. You can't name me one righteous political leader. At a time where we need true leadership, we have none. But we never have, right? Or we wouldn't have had, a string of wars since the Greek city-states, since Mesopotamia, right? Since the elders, right? The elders, had a planetary, what is the Oort belt? There used to be a planet between Mars and us. That was the homeland. That was Terra. There was a galactic war, and that planet got whacked. Just like out of, what's his name's, why Star Wars resonates is because George Lucas sat at the feet of Joseph Campbell for a year while, Joseph, as the Griot, told him the whole story of the solar system, where we came from, the Anunnaki, the whole, the folk, the elders, the builders, the Lemurian, the Atlantean, who are people who fled from space, when this war was going on, they came to Earth. And first, they had to cleanse it of the species that was the dominant here, the dinosaurs. And so they did. Somebody like a bowling alley threw, wing. But that was later on. The Lemurian and the Atlanteans came here while there's still dinosaurs. There were still reptilians, right? And they were intelligent reptiles, it wasn't just, Tyrannosaurus Rex. And this war occurred. The big planet that was the home planet Terra exploded, through, just like, the moon is a Death Star, right? And so, and Mars, the planet of war, the god of war, was where this weapon took out Terra and blew it into parts. And that's what the Oort belt is, right? And, Planet X and, virtually all solar systems are binary stars, two stars, right? So we have a dwarf, a brown dwarf out there, right? And a planet that is, Planet X, unknown. And whether it's a gas giant or a hard metal planet like Earth, unknown. So, but, our forefathers came from there, from all of that, right? And we are just somebody's science, meaning this bag of water isn't me. Right? my, you know, ascending free will is this is just an avatar, right? And because of this catastrophe, we were kind of thrown down, right? Spiritually, octaves and energetics, right? And it comes from the zodiac, So we went through this, high ascending part of the zodiac, and then we came around into a lower, more physical, right? And the Piscean age, kind of was one of the, real base ones, and Aquarian, we're coming up, right? So, my good friend John Birmingham, who purchased my school, which wasn't he purchased the school. He just, took on the possession of the tax bill, like I had for 10 years or more. So I try and call him up once a month, just to see how he's doing. And I take a look at his channel, see what he's up to. And, his channel's still the same thing, him without a shirt showing how he's just worked out and blah, 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 blah. Right? But he has become less self-expressing anger, right? And he's kind of going on about, being kind. And this is good, right? But, you have to serve. You have to exemplify. You have to go out there. You have to, in your, however you do it, I go out, into the world 5-6 times a month, right? Get gas for my car, buy some food, go see a few people, see how things are going, and out there in the world. And every time I go out, I make a supreme effort, not supreme, but I make an effort to go out there, because it takes me 40 miles to go wherever I'm going to go, right? Boone, Johnson City, Kingsport, any of the towns around me, they're all about 40 miles away. And it's only 2, 3, not even county roads, but country roads that from me, the deep green, out to them. And it's actually, those are all relative shortcuts. They're country roads. If I went all the way over here to get on the county road to go over here to go over there, this country road kind of gets me there in about 30 miles, where this one would take me 60, 70 miles, right? So, as I do that, I don't go except on exceptionally beautiful days. I don't go on rainy days. I don't go at night. I don't go on cloudy days because my eyes aren't that good. I want to be really gentle on my car. So I go when I don't think anyone's, so I can go this, so no one comes. Well, these are country roads. No one comes zipping up behind me. I go the speed limit, somewhere between 20 and 40 miles an hour on country roads. So, and as and I know every little turn of it, so I can almost be unconscious and drive safely there. But I become very conscious of my path, right? And very aware of my surroundings. And I prepare myself so when I do go into these towns, I am very aware, very conscious, and I interact with everyone I talk to, whether it's official or store or paying a bill. I am first very aware of the person I'm talking to. Energetically, I see where they're coming from. And then I try to speak to them in a way that makes them feel better, so that when I leave them, they will feel happier, kinder, and more willing to be nice to somebody else instead of leaving them and then they'll be even meaner to the next person, right? So that's what I do. And when John was going, are you being a kind person? Are you being nice? You really have to think about it because you're so, and it's, see, when you think of it that way, you're looking at it as a transactional, meaning I'm going to be really nice because I was told by, a school book that you got to be nice to get into heaven. Well, heaven and hell is right here, right? And so, being the best you can be is like being in heaven. Being that real jerk is like being in hell. It's not fun being a jerk, right? So, from a selfish point of view, I try to be the nicest I can because it's a lot nicer, right? And so when I am by myself, I enjoy my own company. I'm not going on and out about my insecurities, And so I can, again, open up my self to, like yesterday. It was in the morning. It was, got up and it was nice. I because it's still cold, right? So when I get out of bed, it's still cold, and I'm I was counting down as of Monday. I was on, this is, so today, Thursday, is the last day of April in the year 0 of 2020, right? So this is the last day I'll experience of an April, right? It's now 2:08. So I have, something like 8 hours left of April. And so I am, experiencing it as best, in the most, whatever I see, I'm seeing in the silver lining, whatever I'm doing, I'm seeing the silver lining, so that's it. So, what else? So that's what we need to do, right? We need to go forth serving love's co-creation by being that's the sweetest kind of person, not because we got to do it to go to heaven, because it's what feels good. It is what, love's co-creation needs from us, is to be that conscious, ascending, free-willed soul, not some mud puppet, right? So, so anybody got anything to say? 1 hour, 19 minutes, and 34 seconds into the show. There's 5 of you there. 1 thumbs up. How about some more thumbs up, kids? Come on. How about getting some other people watching this show? Have them go back and watch the old ones, right? Because it's really interesting. I go back and watch them. I give a lot of tip of the hats to, I've been talking about this window of opportunity for almost a year, right? I had the 40 days and 40 nights. This is what pretty much every great Moses did, Muhammad did, Vishnu did, Jesus did. You name them, they all went off and quieted themselves down and thought about what was coming and what they were to do, right? And then they went off and did it, right? And I talked about that, back in, I started in May of 2018, and I started talking about the, 40 days and 40 nights within the first week or two. Now, I was, that was in a real disruptive period when I was being thrown out by John and then begged to come back and then thrown out and then begged to come. And I had gone through that, thrown out under the bus. The first time John did that in a real sense, don't come out, was in the middle of January. And it was, 2018 January when we had that, snow apocalypse and, it was 9 degrees below zero in Virginia for every day from, as of the Christmas until February. It was like ridiculously, really deadly cold. And John threw me out then. I had no place to go, had no money. And, John was get out, So, and that was when his Russian bride showed up, and he went up to the airport, and she had been on the airplane for like 38 hours. And, from the time she left to Moscow, time she hit Dulles, 38 hours from stopping and going, and she didn't eat anything. They gave her nothing on the airplane. And then John picked her up, and she was starving. And she said, "Can we eat?" And he said, No, we have to get back. And so he drove back and got lost. And it took them about, 9 hours to go 4 hours worth of driving. And they got there, and I had made a lover's dinner. I had made a roast chicken, fresh vegetables, mashed potatoes, cabbage, Russian cabbage, right? White cabbage and red cabbage, made in those two different ways, and made blintzes, right? And potato pancakes and mashed potatoes with bacon in it and bacon grease, and dark black pumpernickel bread. And I bought a whole loaf at a bakery, and I stuck it in the oven while I was preparing dinner for them. So it came out hot, smelling like it was just freshly baked. And I had gotten fresh cream butter, and I had, apple blintzes and apple kuchen, and I whipped up fresh whipped cream, and I had white, red, and champagne wine for them, right? And I had gotten the table and put a tablecloth on it, 2 things, a candle, and sat them down. And she was starving. And I first brought her the cabbage. The white cabbage was in a cabbage soup with potatoes. And I gave her like a gigantic bowl of that with sour cream on top. And she just, with the black bread and the cream butter and the red wine, she was like, "Oh, I can't believe this." And then I brought out the plate, big plates with chicken, cabbage, mashed potatoes, and potato pancakes. And she ate all that. And John was like, couldn't even talk to her. And I talked a little bit to her, asked her about, her life in Moscow, what she did, what she was, she was a scholar, a linguistic person, and, on and on and on. And John really, you're right. And so basically I sent them up to bed, with a tray of desserts and chocolates, champagne, and a thing of really good coffee, and more of that black bread with the cream butter. And she took it up because that's what she was interested in. And, I thought that would get them into an amorous kind of thing. And the next morning, I got up. I was going to make them breakfast. And she was out there, and she had this like almost mink coat on. And she was out there smoking 4 cigarettes and going, "I got to get out of here. And it's like, right? And so I said, it was still dark, and she's outside in the dark, just with this coat on and her pajamas. And she wasn't even talking to me. She was just going, "Oh, I got to get out of here." And so I said, well, I'm going to catch a few more hours of sleep because it was still dark. And then about an hour later, just as I was falling asleep, John kicked the door in to my little room downstairs and was screaming at me, "I got to leave." And the sun was just coming up, and it was freaking cold. And I said, "Don't you want breakfast, John? I'll make you breakfast." And he goes, "No, you got to go out." So I kind of gathered a few things and got out. But he gave me no time to gather anything. I left all my whatever papers and this and that. And so I then had all of about $30 until my next Social Security check, which was going to be 2 weeks from then, right? So I said, and I went down to the IHOP, and because it's open 24 hours, and I called, and it has a good cell signal, so I called up, got nobody, just got everyone's voicemail, right? And I told them, I'll be at the IHOP for the next hour or two until it gets sunny, and then I have to figure out where to go, because it was still frigging cold. And I had almost a full tank of gas. So I had about 300 miles to go on my one tank of gas. And it was, hadn't snowed. The ground was still dry, but it was freaking cold. So I said, my other group of people that I had been part of was this group of folk up in West Virginia. If you take 220 all the way up to where 220 hits 64 kind of goes to DC, it's an interstate, or it's 66, I'm not quite sure, right? It's one that goes by Christiansburg and it runs into 81. But past it, 220 hits it. And there is this kind of very interesting, not quite a town, but it's where these two big roads cross each other. So there's truck stops and pretty good restaurants at a pretty good price. And actually gasoline is for some reason 10 to 20% all the time cheaper there than anywhere else, right? So I decide to, I've tried, and these people, they're like living in the holler life, so they don't have cell phones, they don't have phones. And it had been a little coal town, right? And they had a number of factories there that they were making coke and they were making electricity and steam for the manufacturing of this, and it was like 19th century everything, right? And so in the early 2000s, coal started to it was going through this boom bust period. And this thing, its technology was so ancient that, to keep it relatively safe was getting too expensive. It was run by that really creepy guy who's always, Mr. Cole. And so his name starts with an M. But anyway, what happened was they were doing mountaintop coal retrieval. No more drilling holes into the mountain. They were, and then scooping the thing out with these buckets and the cables down to where the factories were. And then it kind of was at a bust period, so they weren't really taking care of things. And those scoops, the tops of the mountains, filled up with water. And in 2002 or maybe 98 or 90, somewhere between 98 and 2002, they had a number of really catastrophic, mountain, they call them, things of God. We didn't know this was going to happen. Yeah, we cut up the top of a mountain, you let it fill up with water. Yes, you have no idea that the whole side, and it's happened before, that the whole side of the mountain is going to blow out. Well, it did, and it washed this town of about 400 people, right? And the road that came into it washed it away. The power lines washed it away. But this area had gas. One of the problems they had was that when they would dig the mines into there, the gas would build up and blow up, right? So they started drilling gas lines, not to sell the gas, but to just vent it out of the coal mines. And it was one of the, not byproducts, but, things that everyone in that town had, right? So when the town got washed away, the road got washed away, the electric, because there were power poles, got washed away, but anything in the ground didn't quite get damaged. So the water kind of worked, but there was no electricity to run it, right? The septic, the sewage system kind of worked, but there was no electricity to run it. So it was shut down because it couldn't meet state requirements. Anyway, so anybody who could moved out of there, right? And so, the supermarket, nothing, there was no trucks coming in bringing food or anything, right? So, but there were still about 20 families, maybe all of, 40 people or so that, couldn't leave. They had no money, they didn't have a car, they didn't have education, all they had was working in the mines in those factories, and they never went above that. So I went to, I guess, I bet you that I have, I'm trying to think when I went there with a church group on a Thanksgiving. And I guess it might have been this whole catastrophe to their town might have happened in the 90s, because now that I think about that church group was in the 90s that I was working through. It's when I was involved in looking at the Devil's Triangle. There's this thing called the Devil's Highway that goes from Stanton, Virginia, all the way down to Johnson City, Tennessee. You hang a left, go south on 26 to Asheville. And all along that, you will find these satanic ritual murders, ceremonial, right? And the police of those counties say nothing about it. And Asheville had a lot of it. And I was there from 91 to 98 in Asheville. And from 96 on, Asheville became the groove town. It started being groovy in 95 because we were doing groovy things. We started doing Bell Share, and we had the Arts Collective and the Artist Trust and a few other things. And we had, it was a groovy art town, but very little. Nobody knew about it except the groovy artists, which gave that kernel, that boom in 96, because Asheville stayed what it was for almost, from the Great Depression of 29 till 1996. That's how long it took them to pay their depression debt off. So Asheville was stuck in ember, up in the 20s. Asheville was the Paris of the South, all these great homes and hotels and all this kind of wealth. So the Biltmore House came in the 1800s, the 19th century. And they had the railroad there, and all the people came from the South, Atlanta, all those cities where it was hot in the summertime. They came up to the mountains. They had all these big hotels up near that city just outside of Asheville, starts with a W, Waynesville, Hickory, all that kind of stuff. Anyway, so I was brought to that neck of the woods to do an ethnography on the Biltmore House, and then I did an ethnography on Asheville, because the city, they had because all these rich people lived there from the Civil War on, and they built that city. And in the basement of the city hall, they had this tremendous volume of photos and records and everything you could. And so we did this first. We came there. We were brought in there by the state government, this woman and I. And she was an expert on Asheville and the Gilded Age. That's really what she was an expert on. And she was all about fashion, architecture, and furniture, right? And she had come out of High Point, right? And I'm surprised I never met her when I went. She was there probably 8 years after I was there. And she was focused on furniture. And then she brought the whole thing into the Gilded Age. Anyway, so they got her to come up and identify every piece of furniture in the Biltmore House, and every piece of doorknob and light fixture and hinge. And we made a database. And she was computer girl database, and I was a photographer. And the more avant-garde artist person. So the two of us made this really interesting team of a cultural anthropology, and that's kind of where I was at the time, So we made a great team, and we did an ethnography of the Biltmore House and its thing, because the state and the federal government went to the family that was living there saying, listen, you almost destroyed this place, because the kids were using the Louis XIV armoire as a hockey net. Anyway, so they said, listen, you owe us millions of dollars in taxes. We will let that go if you turn this over into a nonprofit, which the state will run. You will get money from us. You won't have to pay taxes. You'll still get to own all this property, and you'll be able to develop it around what we develop as because we want to rebrand Asheville as a tourist place, right? And so that was in 92. And so, we were there around 91, but that whole ball of wax really started going funding and all that in 92. And then out of that, we found all kinds of stuff that brought us over to the city hall in the basement. And we, again, got more grants to develop this whole, because the state wanted to build Asheville, not just Biltmore House, as this great hipster joint, right? Because it had Black Mountain and a whole bunch of other historical points of reference of culture, and also the mountain culture itself. So, so we did, and we were in the center of that, and there was already this amazing artist scene there. And at UNCA, there were all these great artists like Robert Moog, the inventor of electronic music, ran the art of the music department. And a guy, I forget his name, Ted, his first name started with T, but he was a pretty famous 1970s, 80s Soho artist. He was a lot like my friend John Bowman, who had a niche, a window where he, did a bunch of paintings and got 60, 70, $100,000. And then he kind of burned out. And then he took his little bit of fame and went up to the University of Pennsylvania and became a tenured professor there. And I had other, Richard Serra was a good example, but he was more famous. But they were all doing the Andy Warhol thing, getting their 15 minutes of fame and milking it for what it was. And, what's his name? Samo, there are a whole bunch of guys who, in that period between like 1972 and 92, Soho just kept kicking these guys out, where the guys who owned the galleries would make millions, the artists would make $1 million or $2 million. Keith Haring, a good example. And then people like Beth Lapidus, she would start a trend, and then she would take it. She's ended up in LA in the movie scene and stand-up comedy, and she's like a before Jimmy Dore kind of person. Anyway, so I was part of all of that, and so I took that essence to Asheville, and I was the dude, right? And so I was that crux thing that just kind of kept it percolating, right? And we do art shows. We started this thing called, out of UNCA, we started a thing called the Freely Inquiring Society. This guy named Dave. Again, he was another, my name's David. I forget his name, but he was a really smart kid. Really, really, really had the computer. He understood what Steve Jobs was, what he got an Apple. Steve Jobs gave him like an Apple computer, which was just a box, which was pretty powerful. Now your cell phone is just as powerful. But in 1994, when Apple gave him that, and gave him a little, notoriety, and anyway, it went to his head. But it was good that it went to his head, because him and about 7 other guys, mostly in the music department, because that's where Bob Moog was, and that's Bob was trying to spin these guys out into Silicon Valley, right? And they were doing, they had, I forget the technology, but from Bob's synthesis, and Bob lost. He could, Moog took his name away from him. He couldn't do anything and use his own name, and so he got all these kids to start stuff there in Asheville. And there was a real interesting alternative music scene there, and and there was this guy who had a homeless guy, a great sculptor, and his name was Otter, and he built this amazing. He was one of these guys who could move chunks of concrete all by himself that weighed 20 tons. He had gotten the knowledge of the guys, the Egyptians who could move stone. Anyway, there was this place underneath the Patton Avenue Bridge that connected Western Asheville, the more ritzy side, downtown Asheville. And underneath it, the utility company owned a good chunk of that land, and they would just throw their most toxic and concrete and rebar and all kinds of crazy their garbage there, and would flood. And so they just put it there because they had licenses from the EPA to like temporary store it there, barrels and barrels and barrels of super toxic chemicals. They would just stick on the edge of the French Broad River. And then in the spring, the flood would come try and wash all that shit, down into Tennessee, which would go down towards, Oak Ridge, and everything was so polluted down there that nothing mattered. So that's how it rolled. And so this guy Otter, he was a shamanic alchemist, right? And I saw this, but everyone just saw him as this, homeless guy. And John Cram, who, if any, there's two guys who you would say, who gave us the actual of today. John Cram, that had the Blue Bio Art Gallery, and what's his name? I worked for him. I was his videographer. His name will pop it up. But he was heir to the Philip Morris, one of the heirs of Philip Morris fortune. And so he felt guilty. So he was an uber liberal. And so he was trying to save Asheville for its better self. What was his name? Anyway, and his lawyer and his wife he married, and she was the epitome of a liberal, someone who felt guilty about how racist and sexist and everything, And she came from a very privileged, New England family, and I wish his name will pop into my mind. But he bought this building called the Public Service Building that had been a utility building, beautiful 1930s building, and basically rented it out for free to any nonprofit environmentalist, progressive movement. And he funded them, he made a fund in that building, and there was a great little hole-in-the-wall vegetarian place that was at the YMCA. It was like a lunch stand, and you used to go to Y and get vegetarian food from these guys. Well, in that building, he had his own little annex that he had an apartment and all that stuff. But in the ground floor, he built a free library that he put my friend Paula, a brilliant woman, and put this vegetarian restaurant. So her library was in the back, so you could go in a vegetarian restaurant, get your bowl of soup and freshly made bread, and and these were the things that made Asheville what it is. What was his name? And he did a video. So acid rain really, because there were all these paper mills around between Asheville and Waynesville, and a few, to Georgia, and that's where Georgia Pacific was. And, from World War I up until 1980, they were just pumping, dioxin out the top and out the waterways into the air and the cancer rate was up the hook. And, they, every time they would get sued by the EPA, they would spend, they were making more money doing that, killing people and making paper than they get $1 million or $2 million fine, and they go, fine, sure, it's Then they were, the Jimmy Carter era after the Nixon, we really went after, right? And so what they did was amazing. They did the same thing that Rockefeller did. They kind of broke themselves up. It was owned by Cargill, I think, and they broke themselves up into many different factions. And the most toxic ones basically said, "Okay, we'll clean it up." And the federal government gave them $1 billion to turn that whole area into a Superfund, right? So they just kept doing business as usual and putting the shit in this thing that was considered a super fund. Then, about 6 months before, it was supposed to be all cleaned up and right, they sold the business to the union that ran the paper mill, and they left. And so 6 months later, the union was held the bag, and that corporate entity that was no longer Cargill or whatever it was an entity unto itself, had spent all that $1 billion themselves on themselves, and they did nothing wrong because they bought congressmen and senators to pass laws to say they could do that. And that was like the beginning of this unbelievable, and so it kind of started. You can see this age that we're looking at started with the whacking of JFK and today, right? That's like, but all the stuff that went before it, and you have to realize that FDR blew his brains out. He didn't die. If you go, how did FDR die? Oh, he had his little place in Georgia or wherever he had his little hideaway. He died of a brain aneurysm. He ate his gun, blew the whole side of his head off because he made deals with dimensionals, extraterrestrials, the Greys. The reptiles went to England. The Greys were ours, and the Nordics were the Nazis. And basically, we had been making deals with these guys, since Mesopotamia, right? And we were manufactured by the Anunnaki, not our souls, but our spin the wheel of karma, right? And the more you go to the bottom of the barrel of your karma, the less every life we have leaves an imprint on your soul self, right? And the more you try to serve love's co-creation, the better, you are climbing up the ascension ladder, right? And that TV show of Stargate, they really, that was a very good show. They had pretty much everything that was going on with us was on that TV show. All those people, the Stargate, all of that stuff, the builders, the little creature that took over, it looked like a slimy little toad that was inside all the emperors, So that's where we are. Go watch, versions of, and all those people who are in all those sci-fi series. What's her name? The girl who was, Captain Colonel Carter. She went on to be in, the female version of Frankenstein. And that was true too. That all of that science did occur, and all those people were stuck in all, they have Nikola Tesla on there, and it's So here it is, 5 there, 3 thumbs up. Go get some more. I tell people to get a hold of me at my dudeawake42@gmail, and all I get is spam. And when I do, like when Buddy and a few like Lena, I get no real conversation. I just get either tags or links, or when they try to put in something written, it'll say that the address was lost, right? And I tell people, if you go to the dudeawake42@gmail, you can put some money in my PayPal account, right? And I went and had my computer guru check it out, and he said, no, everything's hooked up, everything works. People just ain't put money in there. And now other people have said, oh, I've tried, but I can't do it. Again, that's kind of what's going on with my little show here, is that, I'm hanging on there, and I'm not really making any money. I live on $481 a month. That's it, total. Haven't got my $1,200 check yet. Haven't gone to the bank. I don't have ways to check it out. Can't make a phone call. Kind of stuck here until I can drive 40 miles to the bank and see what it is. So, and if I tried to use debit card on any other bank, I was told that by my banker that I would be charged $5 for every question I asked, and that bank would then have access to all my banking information, who was not even my bank. So I'm somewhat limited, but I am not restrained. I am here to serve, love's co-creation, to tell you stories, to give you insight, to give you, and in essence, every day is beautiful. Whether it's raining, whether it's sunny, whether it's cold, it's like 48 degrees out there. But soon it'll be warm, right? And that'll probably be it. It'll be 80s during the day and in the 50s at night. And living in a tent under that, it'll be fine. And if it goes into the usual pattern, by the second week of May, it'll stop. It will have a couple more. Like last night, we probably got 3 inches of rain, right? And so, it'll be interesting to see what happens. So that's about it for me. That was a nice little stroll through a lot of. I didn't come up with any, raison d'etre to any story except to show you that they're all the same. It's same as it ever was, gang. The thing is, forget waiting for some hero. You have to be the hero. If you want change in your life, be the change you want to see in your life. That's what I do every frigging day. Now, I'm a moron. I make mistakes, but I try to learn from them. I don't try to be anxious about them. I try to learn, right? And when I am traveling, I try to be as aware as I can to look for the opportunity or the obstacle and navigate. And that's really what humans are best at. If we can, stop being programmed, stop being controlled, and we can navigate, we'll get through this, right? So anyway, that's the story. I don't know what else to tell you. You're not responding, chatting anything, so I can't say anything to you because Lena was the only one to chat today. And as usual, she's always sweet and kind and always herself. That's what I love about that girl. And Buddy and 09 and a whole bunch of, there's about 20 of you who, when you do show up on the chat, are always yourself, right? Aren't trying to be anything but you. And always make pretty interesting comments, right? Not the same thing over and over and over again. And that's when I can tell if you're going to be a troll or you're going to be a this or that, because energetically, you're null. There's like nothing there except an anxiety, And if you put stuff up and you make comments and you're a troll and I don't make any comments about you, you get even more anxious. And that's when you start to get mean, right? And then when I make, oh, look at that kind of comment, that's when you get upset. And that's, when you start going off the hook. And that's usually when I hit one of the 3 dots there. So, but the majority of you, 90% of the cadre who come into the chat are who they are. And that's what I'm looking for. So, okay, I'm going to scat out of here in about 3 seconds because it'll be, there it is. 1 hour, 55 minutes and 55 seconds. Maybe I'll see you this afternoon, 7 p.m.-ish, okay?